is the powerful family behind the Hoover Dam? Sally Denton joins us to talk about her new book, The Profiteers.
Well, it's actually 5 generations of a California family, the first real mega company in the American West.
What makes a Broadway musical work? Jack Viertel will tell us about the secret life of the American musical.
And the show speaks to you in different ways depending on where you are on the spectrum of life. And yet it seems to speak the truth all the time. And it has a great score. I mean, I could listen to that score every day, all day.
Alexandra Alter will give us an update from the literary world. And Greg Cowles has bestseller news. This is Inside the New York Times Book Review. I'm Pamela Paul. Sally Denton joins us from Las Vegas. Her newest book is The Profiteers, Bechtel and the Men Who Built the World. Sally, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So this is an investigative look into a privately held company started by the Bechtel family, but Bechtel is not a household name. Who is this family?
Well, it's actually 5 generations of a California family. The first real mega company in the American West. It began with Warren Bechtel, who was a road grader in Nevada and California, got some of the first government contracts to build the roads and throughout the West, and then pipelines. The signature project for them was in 1931 when they built Hoover Dam as the lead company in a consortium of Western companies called Six Companies. This was the biggest technological engineering project in the history of America, if not the world, and there was no American company, no Western company capable of doing it on their own. So they banded together to dam the Colorado River with the iconic concrete dam, which is now Hoover Dam. It was Boulder Dam at the time. The family has gone on for, as I said, 5 generations of Bechtel men, a really unique dynasty. You're right that it's hardly a household name in America, but it's very much a household name throughout the world, which I found during the research. It was a household name for me because I was raised in Boulder City, Nevada, which was the company town for the construction of Boulder Dam. They've been on my horizon all of my life.
This is not your first book, though. You've done a number of other investigative books, one about Las Vegas. Did you sort of always want to write about the Bechtels? Were you always curious, having that childhood exposure to the company name, to the family?
No, I was. Bechtel was really not on my radar during all these years. As I said, I live primarily in Santa Fe, where I've been for 25 years, although Bechtel was also kind of visible there because they, beginning in 2007, they started managing Los Alamos National Laboratory.
They're managing the laboratory?
Yes, they manage many of the nation's nuclear weapons complex, including Los Alamos National Laboratory and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. In fact, I devote quite a bit of my book to this subject because I found it stunning how few Americans realized that under George W. Bush in 2007, the nuclear weapons complex was privatized.
Yeah, that was what was shocking me.
Yeah, it was not done with a lot of fanfare. So unless you were in an area like, Savannah River or Hanford, Washington, or Lawrence Livermore or Los Alamos, one would not even know that. But Bechtel has been the lead contractor in nuclear reactors throughout the world since the first reactor in the United States in the 50s.
One of your points with this book is that they are not the most open company. They're privately held and in large part quite secretive. Did that make it hard to research the book?
Well, it made it challenging, more challenging than if it were a publicly traded corporation because it's not required to file anything with the Securities and Exchange Commission or even with shareholders. I mean, no public requirements. So that made it a little bit more difficult. I was lucky that I had a fellowship at the Library of Congress, a research fellowship, and so I was able to really mine all of the resources that the Library of Congress, which has probably more resources than any facility in the world, they subscribe to probably every database, so I could really get into their the Middle East and some of their projects abroad because they're very far flung, as you can see from the book, they're all over the world, and they've built projects they claim on 25,000 projects on every continent. When I began the book, I really thought I began it because I did a commission story in about 2009, I think, for Science and Technology magazine, who wanted me to do something on the 75th anniversary of Hoover Dam. And it was not an investigative piece. They chose me because I was, I have a long track record as a journalist and author, and had grown up in Boulder City. So it was a cover story for Science and Technology. So that's when I started looking at them and thinking, wow, they're a lot more interesting than just, Warren Bechtel, who built this dam 75 years ago. I had no idea that they had expanded into, they had gone from dam building in the 30s to shipbuilding for World War II, and then into the nuclear industry, and then into oil pipelines throughout the Middle East, and natural gas throughout the world, and water in South America, and infrastructure, up until, getting the largest contract for the first major infrastructure contract in 2003 for the rebuilding of Iraq.
So the company is now a $37 billion company. Is it controlled still by the Bechtel family?
It is. It's the Riley Bechtel, who had been the head of it until last year, recently turned over the reins to his son, Brendan. So it was Warren Bechtel was the first. He died mysteriously before the Hoover Dam was even completed. He was invited, according to the family, he was invited to the Soviet Union by Stalin to advise them on dam building and the subway system. And he died mysteriously while in Moscow after just a few days. There were 3 sons that he left behind, and there was some rivalry, and the middle son, Stephen Bechtel, ended up taking the helm of the company. He joined with a man named John McCone briefly, for a few years, who had provided the steel with Consolidated Steel to the Hoover Dam project. And so for a while it was Bechtel-McCone, but McCone decided to go into government and actually would become head of the Atomic Energy Commission, which helped Bechtel get into the nuclear business. And McCone ultimately would become director of the CIA under JFK.
I want to stop, but just go back to that story of Warren Bechtel's death in Moscow in 1933, because it does seem rather mysterious. What could you find out about that death? And are there Soviet archives?
I researched a lot about the circumstances of it through the Soviet media at the time, the contemporaneous newspaper accounts, and it was the family ultimately said that he had died of an overdose of insulin, but there was no record of him ever being diabetic up until the years when he died. His family, his wife and daughter, he had left them behind in Austria, apparently under the orders of the Soviets, and they had great difficulty getting his body out of the Soviet Union. Now, this was in the New York Times at the time, and in his obituary, his American obituaries, they said that there was difficulty getting the body back to California, and they were helped by a man that the daughter had met apparently in Austria, who was taken with her, a count, I think, and he was able to help get the body out of Moscow.
Is there reason to believe, other than the fact that, this is Stalinist Russia, that something else happened other than an insulin overdose?
It seemed particularly strange to me because at the time, 2 things. One, the United States didn't have any diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union at the time. And so he wasn't there, with any kind of government sponsorship of the United States. It would be shortly thereafter, actually, that Roosevelt, FDR, would open relations with the Soviet Union. But at this point, he would have been the first American businessman to have been invited there, probably, or certainly that we know of. The other thing that was, I thought, highly unusual was Bechtel was notoriously right-wing, anti-communist politically. And on the dam, in fact, the construction of the dam, there were a lot of labor problems, which, Warren Bechtel attributed to just communist rabble-rousers. So the idea of Stalin inviting this kind of fervently anti-communist American businessman to the Soviet Union at a very diplomatically sensitive moment strikes me as unusual.
And was there anything that you could uncover, like from the Soviet archives, that offered any explanation other than
No,
what was
not
in
really. I mean, I was able to get a lot of Russian language documents and mostly news accounts that were translated by the Soviet scholars at the Library of Congress for me, and there was really nothing that I was able to find to that. So I don't allude to anything like that in the book, just to point out how highly unusual it was and all of the circumstances around it.
Did you talk to members of the Bechtel family?
No, they were not open. While I was researching and writing, I contacted the corporate communications department and wanted to interview Riley Bechtel, one of the principals at the time, and I was in the first instance, I was referred to the company's website. And I had been to the company website, but when I went, I was referred by the communications department to specifically to the online press kit. And so I went there, and I really found that between that, I mean, the website is absolutely brimming with publicly available information or what they provide about these various projects throughout the world. I mean, they're very it's stunning in the breadth and reach of these projects. But then I found there were authorized and published corporate histories that were provided by the Bechtel Company over the years, one about their projects in the Arab lands and one about the beginning, the roots of the family. I mean, extensive corporate histories that they had pulled together over several decades. And then when galleys were made available to reviewers, Bechtel asked to see a copy, asked Simon & Schuster to see a copy, and I directed the publisher to make one available to them.
Have you heard from them?
Yeah, they responded. I mean, after following an initial review, they made clear that they were very unhappy with the book and with my approach, and especially with my conclusions.
What was their particular unhappiness? I know that there's a lot in the book, a lot about the relationship between the company and government, but was there anything in particular that they were distraught?
Well, they had, I don't remember. There were several. They provided information on several things that they disagreed with, and I was still finalizing the book at the time, so they commented on specific statements that they disagreed with, and I looked at all of their statements, all of their statements, and took them into account as I was completing it. And I also offered to consider any further statements they disagreed with, and offered them a month to allow for their further input. And I also, at this time, reiterated my request to interview Riley Bechtel or Brendan Bechtel. I wanted to interview one of the principals. I didn't feel any need to interview, a corporate spokesman. Bechtel declined either to identify any further statements or to make any of the executives available for an interview. And
were you able to talk to anyone who had worked there?
Oh, yes. I talked to dozens of people who had worked for the company. A lot of my source material was, as I said, they've got 50,000, or maybe I didn't say before, they've got 50,000. They now call them colleagues because I think most of the website used to call them all employees, but I think they're all mostly subcontractors. Mm-hmm. I think that they've got hundreds, thousands of projects throughout the world, and I've talked to many, many, many people who've worked for them.
Last question, going back really to the very first thing you see on the book, the title, The Profiteers. Why did you choose that as a title?
It was Behemoth at first. When I started the book, that was my working title because I thought, here's this massive construction company. And then once I did 4 years of research and going into seeing the relationship between government, the massive profits that they make at the hands of government while maintaining this, very anti-government stance, I think it was with a GAO report and this is as far back as the shipbuilding and Hoover Dam, and then the shipbuilding, where there was a government accounting report that talked about the profiteering, and that there had never been so much money made by so few men and at the taxpayers' hands. And then it just kind of struck me that this is really, it's not just about a behemoth construction company. This is about profiteering at the public trough. So I shifted into more down that direction.
Okay, well, a lot more really fascinating detail in the book about that interesting relationship between Bechtel and the government. Sally, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
The book again is The Profiteers, Bechtel and the Men Who Built the World by Sally Denton. Alexandra Alter's here now with news from the literary world. Hi, Alexandra.
Hi, Pamela.
It's always prize season, right?
It used to just be the fall. Now it's a year-round thing. It's just like the way Oscar campaigns keep getting longer. So, yes, there's another literary award. The long list was announced for the Man Booker International Prize. So this is a prize given out by the Man Booker Group for the best global fiction that's been translated into English.
I feel like it really is like a total year-long thing, because like next in like 2 weeks is the celebration in New York for the Man Prize Booker winner.
Exactly. So,
But they're
and not
starting-
only that, next week is the National Book Critics Circle Award. So,
All right.
and this is the long list. There will be a short list, and then there will be a winner.
And this is also their international prize, right?
Exactly.
So it's different. Can you explain for people who don't know the difference?
Yes. The difference is for these authors, they write in another language. It has to be translated into English. But the Man Booker Prize goes to a novel that's written in English. I mean, frankly, sometimes I find this prize more interesting because it's a chance to look at what kind of books are being published all over the world. And they really picked an interesting group this year. They narrowed it down to 13 books, and they changed.
That's not so narrow.
That's true. They changed, but from 155.
Okay.
In 9 languages from 12 countries. And you really see a great range. So there's Elena Ferrante. People probably know who she is. That's
Who she is, but isn't.
but isn't. Yes, that's the pseudonymous Italian author of the Neapolitan series. And also Nobel Prize winner Orhan Pamuk was nominated this year. A Chinese author whose novel was banned in mainland China was nominated, which I think is particularly relevant this year with all of the kind of crackdowns on Chinese writers and publishers.
Crackdowns now in Turkey, too. So.
Exactly. And a South Korean author, Han Kang, who I wrote about recently and who was reviewed in the book review for her novel The Vegetarian. It was her first time being translated into English, and she's very popular in South Korea. So it's great that she's getting this recognition. Kenzaburo Oi for Death by Water, which is his 16th book translated into English, apparently. There's a Brazilian author who I had never heard of, Raduan Nassar. This is, The Guardian called it an explosively erotic 47-page story called A Cup of Rage, was nominated. So as you can see,
title.
Yes, exactly. There's a whole range of styles and authors from all over the world. And it's interesting because this year they changed the rules a little bit. Typically, this prize is awarded every other year for an author's entire body of work. So in this case, it's just going to a single novel. And I think that's opened it up quite a bit because we're seeing people like Han Kang getting nominated for, her first work translated into English. So for people who, like me, who are curious about what's popular in other countries, what kind of works we're not necessarily seeing so much of here, I think this is a great kind of spotlight. And, of course, there will be a short list. It'll be announced on April 14th, and the winner will be announced on May 16th.
All right. Thanks, Alexandra.
Thanks for having me.
Jack Viertel is here now. He is the author of a new book, The Secret Life of the American Musical, How Broadway Shows Are Built. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You have such an immense resume that I'm going to leave it to you to explain all the various things that you're involved with.
Well, at the moment, I'm senior vice president of Jujamson Theaters, which owns 5 Broadway theaters, and we occasionally produce what's in them, but a lot of the time we are hosts and landlords, you might say, to new musicals and revivals and plays even.
And what are the shows right now?
What's going on there now is a production of The Crucible, Arthur Miller's The Crucible, Book of Mormon, Jersey Boys, Kinky Boots, and Something Rotten. So we have 5 shows up and running at the moment, which is a happy state of affairs. I'm also the artistic director of the Encore series at City Center, where we do 3 usually lesser-known musicals or less often produced in New York musicals.
One of the best ongoing things in New York, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. And over at City Center, we're presenting 1776 the last weekend in March leading into April. I think it closes April 3rd. And we've just done Cabin in the Sky, and we're going to do Stephen Sondheim and Richard Rodgers' Do I Hear a Waltz in May. So it's a fairly full plate, but very enjoyable.
And you've also taught at the Tisch School of the Arts.
Yes, I taught, and I'm on hiatus at the moment, 2 graduate school courses in musical theater structure, which is really fun and kind of keeps me young, because you have people who are 20-something years old, most of them, who have surprisingly a little less history than I would have expected, but a lot more ambition and contemporary ways of looking at things. And that's extremely healthy for someone like me.
And in a past life, you've also been a theater critic.
I was a theater critic for the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner in Los Angeles when there were 2 papers in Los Angeles back in the day. And also was a dramaturg at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles for about 14 years, right at the beginning of my adult life.
Okay, well, I don't know how you had time to write a book, but obviously...
on the train in the morning.
What made you decide you wanted to write about
I
musicals?
taught these classes at NYU, and then I started to get asked to give talks hither and yon. And in the question and answer period, someone would always say, when are you going to write a book about all this? And I thought that was sort of a not great idea, because the classes that I was teaching were for young would-be professionals, but the talks weren't. They were for regular musical theater fans. And so I just started and wrote what turned out to be sort of half a book proposal and submitted it to an agent who said, this is only half a book proposal, and taught me how to do the rest. And I really, I hadn't really written a lot since I stopped being a critic, which was in the mid-'80s. And I had forgotten how much I just liked it. And also writing had gotten a lot easier because there were laptops and keyboards and all of that. So I just started and never stopped.
The book has a very interesting structure. You kind of follow the structure, the architecture of a musical. So you start with the opening curtain.
Yeah, I mean, this structure came out of one of the courses that I teach at NYU, which is called a song plot, which starts with an overture, and then what's likely to be an opening number, and then what's likely to be a number that follows an opening number, which is usually called an I Want song, usually. And,
which came first, the Disney I Want song or the musical I Want song?
Well, the musical I Want song goes back as far as Rodgers and Hammerstein, and probably considerably further. It's gotten to be more and more, in a sense, I hate the word formulaic, but it's gotten to be sort of an obligation, because it does set things in motion in a very useful way for writers, I think, to have a main character who has a very clearly defined sense of what they need in the world, who they are in the world, what they don't have in the world, and their energy to go get that thing.
What's your favorite I Want song?
Probably Some People from Gypsy. I Want songs don't have to say I want. I mean, you can say all I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air. But you can also say some people can thrive and bloom living life in a living room.
And now I'm
but
singing
not
it in
me.
my head.
Yeah.
Let's hear just a snippet of that I Want song from Gypsy.
Some people can thrive and bloom, living life in a living room. That's perfect for some people of 105. But I at least gotta try. When I think of all the sights that I gotta see, at all the places I gotta play, all the things that I gotta be, you tell my papa, what do you say?
I don't want to make this sound too much like you fill in the blanks and then you've written a musical.
Right, people are going to start taking notes.
Right, and doesn't it's funny, it doesn't really, in my experience of building new musicals, which I've not done, I've only done it myself once, but I've helped on a lot of them. It's not a formulaic thing. You don't start out thinking, okay, well now it's time for the I Want song. It just, when you look at the show in hindsight, it seems to have fulfilled some of these things. And the next sort of most common thing to happen is something that we call a conditional love song.
I love that idea.
Which is called a conditional love song because of If I Loved You, the Rodgers and Hammerstein song from Carousel. And, this is a courtship, the first courtship moment between a couple is always the same moment, I think. Creating those moments and those songs has just become something that every songwriter has done.
Is that a Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of invention? Because I also think of the People Will Say We're in Love from Oklahoma.
They had one in almost every show, but I don't think they were invented. They were not invented by Rodgers and Hammerstein. I'm sure they go back to Puccini and beyond. You know, it's such a human thing. I think that Hammerstein, who liked to be called Hammerstein, as I think, was he was really in a sense, the great playwright of the American musical, and he was very thoughtful and careful about how these things were structured. And so I tend to identify things with him because he did them better than anybody else, but not necessarily because he was the first one to ever do them.
You also talk about the songs right before and after intermission. What distinguishes those two numbers?
Well, songs right before intermission, first act finales, whether they're an individual song or a bunch of reprises slammed together, which they often are, tend to either set up a huge crisis in Act Two, or actually they are a huge crisis, which is going to have to get resolved in Act Two. And that brings down the curtain in a way that makes the audience want to come back for Act Two, we hope.
Right.
Songs right after intermission tend to be throwaways. I think this tradition actually started back in the 1920s when audiences kind of lurked in the lobby or went across the street to get a drink or smoke a cigar or whatever. And they didn't all get back into the theater and get settled down by the time the second act had started. So the authors quickly understood that however they started the second act, if you missed it, it better not be that important that you missed it. But today, when that doesn't happen at all and everybody is back in their seats at the beginning of Act Two, we still tend to do these sort of one-for-nothing songs that are just a gift to the audience, whether it's Take Back Your Mink in the classic period or the Big Dollhouse and Hairspray in the modern period. That's what we do. I love the fact that the opening number in Act Two of Hamilton is called What Did I Miss?
Do you think that was a wink? And
I think so. Lin-Manuel's pretty versed in this stuff, and although the song is about Thomas Jefferson coming back from France and saying, what did I miss? The notion that it's called What Did I Miss is, I think, a good double entendre.
So what did I miss? What did I miss? Virginia, my home, sweet home, I want to give you a kiss. I've been in Paris meeting lots of different ladies. I guess I basically missed the late 80s. I traveled the wide, wide world and came back to this. There's a letter on my desk from the president. Haven't even put my bag down yet. Sally, B.L.M., darling, won't you open it?
People talk about Hamilton, though, as kind of breaking a lot of the rules or expanding on them.
I think it broke a lot of rules and expanded on them and obeyed some. I think I'm Not Going to Miss My Shot is a great I Want song. It's taken up by many members of the company in addition to Alexander Hamilton, but that's a classic one. I mean, and it's in exactly that spot,
He doesn't say I want. But
no, you know so clearly what he wants and how many ways he wants it, being, an immigrant and a bastard child and all of those things in a world where there was a lot of aristocracy still. It sets up a very high hill for him to climb right at that moment. And you know that he wants to climb it and he's got the tools to climb it. You also know that there's a lot of people who are going to try to stop him. That makes for a good athletic contest of a show.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I'ma get a scholarship to King's College. I probably shouldn't brag, but dag, I'm amazed and astonished. The problem is I got a lot of brains, but no polish. I gotta holler just to be heard with every word. I drop knowledge. I'm a diamond in the rough, a shining piece of coal, trying to reach my goal. My power of speech, unimpeachable. Only 19, but my mind is older. These New York City streets get cold.
In what other ways did he kind of follow the rules? And then in what ways did he break them?
Well, I think in a funny way, one of the things that I write about in the book are things called tent poles, which are numbers about 80% of the way through Act One that are big energy bursts. And they sort of get you through to the end of the act because, after an hour and 5 minutes, you're beginning to, you and the audience are beginning to flag a little. There are numbers like Tevye's Dream and in Fiddler and even the Motherhood March and Hello, Dolly. To some degree, one of their duties is to kind of get the audience's blood boiling again. And Lin-Manuel Miranda chose to do the entire Revolution as a tentpole toward the end of Act One in two linked songs. And I don't know that he knew that that was what he was doing. I don't know that he set out to follow a rule. I seriously doubt it. But when you look back at the show, you go, oh, yeah, that energy burst comes right where it does in Hello, Dolly. It's odd.
Hamilton, obviously, not everyone is able to see that show. So I want to talk a little bit about another show that I think a lot of people are familiar with because it was a movie, because it's been revived many times. It's being revived now, which is Fiddler on the Roof. I'm assuming that's one of your favorites.
It's one of my favorites. It's a show I saw right after it opened when I was 15 years old, and it had a huge impact on me. It never occurred to me how I would work in the theater, because when you're young, the only thing you see in the theater is actors, and so you assume you'll be an actor.
Did you assume you'd be an actor?
I assumed I would be an actor. I was an extremely good Fagin in high school and a very bad King Arthur the following year. But I was no actor, and by the time I got halfway through freshman year in college, I realized that everybody who was there acting was a better actor than I was, so I better figure out some other path.
How did you get to that other path?
Kind of by mistake. A friend of mine from college got me the gig as a theater critic in Los Angeles, where, you know, there are precious few people who focus on theater because it's basically a movie town and a television town. Because I loved the theater, not because I loved journalism, but I could write an English sentence, so they hired me. And then when I realized that I actually was in journalism, I was writing for a newspaper, I sort of understood that I had to get out of journalism because my love was the theater, and I managed to get myself hired at the Mark Taper, largely through journalism, because I got a press release in the office saying that the dramaturg at the Mark Taper Forum was moving on to become the artistic director of a theater in the Midwest, and I thought, oh, good, there's a vacancy there. So I called them and had a lunch, and here I am.
It sounds like a hard sort of thing to become an artistic director. Is that the normal? I mean, what is the normal path
yes.
to that?
I mean, an artistic not-for-profit theaters have artistic directors, generally speaking. It's a model that's now probably 50 years old or more, where there's an artistic director and a managing director, and the managing director is certainly largely assumes the financial management and other business tasks, and the artistic director is supposed to have a vision for what the theater is supposed to do that makes it an essential part of whatever art scene it's in the middle of. So, I mean, I became the artistic director at Encores. I'm the third artistic director. I did not start this organization. I'm actually technically the fourth. We had an artistic director who lasted through half of one season. You know, that job is figuring out what shows we should be doing and figuring out who should be directing them and how to kind of approach them. And the music director for the series, Rob Berman, is my collaborator in all of those things. Most regular resident theaters don't have a resident music director, but because Encores is all about musicals, that's what we do.
Is that as fun as it sounds? Because that sounds like the most fun thing.
It's huge fun. It's the best job I could ever have. It's, an opportunity to explore musicals we want to explore, and we don't have to worry about the commercial impact of them. So if someone says, why are you doing that show? The answer is because we want to hear it. We want to know what's in it. I mean, Cabin in the Sky was a show that no one has really heard the score of since 1940, however long that is, 75, 80 years. It was a wonderful experience, and there's no way in the world that show can become a commercial hit on Broadway, but That's not the point. I know this is a very hard one, what is your favorite musical, and what was your favorite musical to write about in this book? My favorite musical, that's actually easy, is Follies. I don't think it's a perfect musical. I think it's partly my favorite musical because I saw it repeatedly trying out in Boston when I was in college at a very, crucial period of growing up from boy to man. And I keep returning to it over and over and over again. It's just, to me, that's just, the opportunity to see that show is just heaven. What makes it so good? It hit a certain moment in time in America when we were waking up from the sunny optimism of Oklahoma and facing the Vietnam War and our own disappointment about what it really meant to be an American and how mixed a bag that was. And at the same time, it told a story of two marriages that are in trouble and need rescuing or reexamining, and presented the ghosts of the young people who fell in love. And when I first saw it, I was one of those young people who fell in love. And when I saw it last, when we produced it at Encores, there was actually one production since then, I was older than the old people. And the show speaks to you in different ways depending on where you are on the spectrum of life. And yet it seems to speak the truth all the time. And it has a great, great score. I mean, I could listen to that score every day, all day.
And then was that your favorite show then to write about?
No, I wrote about it almost not at all because, frankly, that one really does break all the rules, or many, many of the rules, almost all. I don't know that I can answer that. I had great fun writing about Carousel. I had great fun writing about Hairspray and Book of Mormon.
Carousel also breaks a lot of rules.
It does, although it obeys a lot of rules. I mean, it has the classic conditional love song, and certainly has a second act opener. This was a real nice clam bake that you can miss. It pays attention.
But an incredibly sad story.
An incredibly sad story, and a story that some people have a lot of difficulty with politically today because it's about a man who strikes his wife and she doesn't want to leave him.
Does that make it hard to revive?
I don't think it does, but it's subject to people criticizing it. I think it's actually about a very common life situation, and because it's Rodgers and Hammerstein who are thought of as this sort of sentimental and sunny pair of guys, people are either shocked by it or think that they were naive about it and thought that it was okay to say that. I think they're saying it because it happens in life all the time, and the complications of it are real and profound. And the show is real and profound to me, and doesn't resolve itself in a way that makes you comfortable. At least doesn't make me comfortable. But I don't think that's a reason not to do a show.
Why is it, if it's fundamentally about sort of the architecture of a show and all of the elements are there, why is it that some revivals work and others don't, if you sort of have the bones there?
A script and a score amount to a blueprint. I mean, there still has to be a production. There still have to be actors and a director and design and the sound of the music and everything else. And in today's world, commercially, I think revivals tend to work when they have big stars in them. We're hitting a point, I think, where a lot of these shows that I think of as older shows but still contemporary in the sense that they still speak to me actually don't feel so contemporary to some audiences. They feel really old-fashioned. A show like Camelot or even My Fair Lady, I think, feels old-fashioned. It doesn't feel old-fashioned to me. I think it's actually a masterwork. But an audience that has really grown up on post-Les Miserables Broadway, Wicked and everything that followed, Avenue Q and Hairspray and The Producers and Hamilton. My Fair Lady feels like a different animal altogether. It feels like you're going to a museum in some way or other. And I think that makes it harder and is going to continue to make it harder and harder to commercially revive those shows. And what makes them work commercially usually is stars.
There's a big piece in New York Magazine, I think actually it's more like a package, several pieces about, this really being Broadway's moment, that there's this second golden age. Or do you feel that way?
Certainly commercially I do. It's a tricky time on Broadway because while there are a lot of hit shows and a lot of shows that are giving a lot of people a lot of pleasure, those shows now run so long because the audience has become so large that they crowd out the crop of new shows to some degree because there aren't theaters to put them in. For us on Broadway, I think it's really, a lot of it is really about real estate. There's now, a theater like the Majestic has now not been available for almost 30 years. So, because Phantom of the Opera is playing there. So if you have a new musical or a new play and look around for a theater, well, okay, Book of Mormon took the O'Neill off the map and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wicked took the Gershwin off the map. Lion King has taken the Minskoff off the map. So where are we going to play our show?
Right. It's almost like there's a Broadway really now for tourists and a Broadway for New Yorkers, and they're not always the same thing.
They're not. And I think that, this trend, which has been very successful of having stars in plays for very limited runs, has really created a new little business. It's not that little a business. It's a new business on Broadway. But that's, I think New Yorkers are more likely to be found in those theaters than they are at the Lion King today.
Jack Viertel, the book is The Secret Life of the American Musical, How Broadway Shows Are Built. Let's play one of your favorite songs from a production currently on Broadway.
From a production currently on Broadway. Well, all right, let's take Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of my favorite shows and is a production currently on Broadway, although it's not a new play. But let's hear a little bit of If I Were a Rich Man, which is a wonderful I Want song from Fiddler.
Jack, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
If I were a rich man, All day long I'd biddy biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a bitty bitty rich, idle diddle 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 man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the...
Greg Cowles is here now with Bestseller News. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Pamela.
And you've got lots of news.
Yeah, mostly on the nonfiction side of things, but there are a couple of new titles over in fiction, including a story collection by Maeve Binchy, who died back in 2012. But this book, A Few of the Girls, collects all of her stories going back to the very beginning of her career. And that is new at number 12, called A Few of the Girls, story collection by Maeve Binchy. And then up at number 1, a new book at the top of the list, Clive Cussler and Justin Scott continue their historical series about the New York detective Isaac Bell with a book called The Gangster. That's the 9th book in this series, and it's new at number 1.
All right, on nonfiction?
Nonfiction, there are 6 new titles, and there's some really substantial titles in this bunch. Starting down at number 15, the journalist Rebecca Traister has written kind of a work of sociology and journalism called All the Single Ladies, which looks at the history of kind of young womanhood and marriage among women.
Or lack thereof.
Well, exactly. The thesis here is that women are waiting much longer to get married, if indeed they get married at all, and what effects that has on politics and culture and other parts of society. That book, All the Single Ladies, new at number 15. Then at number 14, a sports book by John Feinstein, who writes a lot about college basketball, has another college basketball book called The Legends Club. It looks at 3 college basketball coaches who are legends, as you'd guess from the title. Dean Smith from the University of North Carolina, his big rival Mike Krzyzewski from Duke University, and Jim Valvano from North Carolina State. All going back to about the 1980s when that rivalry really heated up.
I'm nodding knowingly, even though I know nothing about this. Okay.
Then up at number 12, the New York Times journalist Timothy Egan has a history called The Immortal Irishman. It's a look at Thomas Francis Meagher, who was an Irish revolutionary who came to America and ended up becoming a general in the Civil War, leading the Irish Brigade in the Civil War. We had Rebecca Traister down at 15 looking at single ladies. Then at number 7, we have Nancy Jo Sales looking at American girls, girlhood in America in the modern age, especially in light of social media and how that has changed friendships and just the cultural environment for girls in America today. Then at number 6, Matthew Desmond, who is a sociologist at Harvard, but has also written a couple of real works of journalism, has another one called Evicted. It's this immersive look at the poorest neighborhoods of Milwaukee and at the crisis of eviction, and the housing crisis in general among the poorest of the poor, how hard it is for them to find stable housing while they're dealing with everything else in their lives.
And also recently a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful book that's gotten a lot of attention, including a front cover review in the book review by Barbara Ehrenreich. Also, a very substantial book, although not a very big one. This is about 80 pages. The name of the book is 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. It's by an Italian theoretical physicist named Carlo Rovelli. These are just what it says. It's 7 lessons on modern physics, originally written as essays for an Italian newspaper and then adapted for this book, and he kind of covers the whole field.
And it came out a couple of years ago in Italy.
It came out a couple of years ago in Italy. The timing is great for him in America because it comes out less than a month after scientists confirmed the discovery of gravitational waves, which Einstein predicted a century ago in the theory of general relativity.
And though I'd like to believe that all Americans want to read about theoretical physics, there had to be some kind of reason, I would think, that would get it to number 5 on the bestseller list.
I have to say, theoretical physicists have done surprisingly well on the list over the years. Stephen Hawking, of course, has been a bestseller. So have been Brian Greene, who is one of the big proponents of string theory, which, by the way, Carlo Rovello does not agree with string theory. He developed a competing theory called the loop quantum gravity theory. Both of those things try to unite the theory of general relativity and kind of big ideas about gravity and the cosmos at the biggest levels with micro ideas about quantum physics and quantum mechanics.
All right. Well, wannabe bestseller writers, you can write about theoretical physics and get on the list.
Yeah, Lisa Randall and Lawrence Krauss have done it as well.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Pamela.
Remember, there's more at nytimes.com/books. Our producer is Jocelyn Gonzalez, and you can always write to us at books@nytimes.com. Thanks for listening. For the New York Times, I'm Pamela Paul.